Headlines: Koreans cast ballots in the country's largest ever parliamentary by-elections on Wednesday. We get you the latest and go in-depth on results of the vote. Korea's June industrial output grows at the fastest pace in 4 years and 9 months, but it may be too early to call it a recovery trend. The U.S. and the European Union hit Russia with fresh sanctions over the crisis in Ukraine. Hello and welcome to ARIRANG News. Live from Seoul, I am Kang Tae-ri. Thanks for joining us tonight. We begin with the latest on today's by-elections here in Korea. Polls have just closed. 15 parliamentary seats representing constituencies nationwide on the line. Some call it a mini general election, as the outcome of today's voting holds great implications not only for the parties but also for the Park Geun-hye administration. And for a better look at the expected outcome and the party's reactions, we have Choi Yoo-sun at the News Center and Ji Myung-gil standing by for us at the National Assembly. Yoo-sun, let's start off with you and start with today's voter turnout.
The National Election Commission says as of 7 p.m., the overall turnout stood at 30.4%. Now, that includes the amount of votes cast during last week's early voting period. 30.4% is less than the by-election average of 35.3% and is less than the turnout from the two most recent by-elections held in April and October of last year. This, of course, is lower than the 50% range turnout in the last June 4th local election and the mid-70% turnout recorded in the 2012 presidential election. And the 30% range comes as no surprise, as voting day fell on a weekday and at the peak of summer vacation season. Having said that, I should also mention the turnout was considered a major determinant in this election, as more than half of the constituencies did not clearly support one party over the other. In the past, the ruling party fared better when the turnout was low, while the opposition benefited from a higher turnout. And that's because conservative older voters tend to cast ballots more so than the liberal younger generation voters.
And last week's two-day early voting also saw a turnout of nearly 8%, was it? Which was the highest level recorded from an early voting period.
Right. The higher than expected participation led many to wonder whether that trend would continue on the actual voting day. What's interesting is that the districts that had rival candidates neck and neck in pre-election polls saw a greater turnout, whereas those with a strong party preference had a much lower participation rate. The highest turnouts were observed in the hotly contested Suncheon Goksang of Jeollanam-do province and in the Dongjak-B district of Seoul, with a turnout of 48% and 43% respectively.
That's right. Suncheon Goksang region is actually particularly more interesting because it's a traditional liberal opposition this time stronghold, where President Park Geun-hye's close aide and former press secretary Lee Jung-hyun is running a tight race against former President Roh Moo-hyun's aide, Seo Ga-won.
Right, and Dongjak-B is where the former Seoul mayor candidate Na Kyung-won is competing against No Whae-chan of the Minor Justice Party. And this is a strategically important constituency. And given that, we saw a dose of political drama, which in the end merged opposition party contenders to run against Na Kyung-won. And with this merger, it will be very interesting to watch how Na Kyung-won's support is impacted. And we can expect to see a better picture of which party will claim victory by 10 p.m. tonight. And by 11, find out which candidate will take the seat of the most contested constituencies.
We sure will, and we will, of course, be on the top of the latest. Now, let's move on to see what rival parties are currently doing. Myung-gil, any reactions or words yet from the rival parties?
Good evening, Cherry. Well, voting ended just a few minutes ago, and so far, parties seem to be holding in their reactions. The ruling Saenuri Party's chairman, Kim Moo-sung, and the party's Supreme Council members are on their way to the Saenuri Party's headquarters, where they'll monitor the situation as casting voting starts. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy's co-leader planned to stay within the National Assembly to discuss today's election and get prepared for the election results. Throughout the day, the ruling Saenuri Party once again asked people's support in picking their candidates to secure a stable majority in parliament and act as much needed support for the success of President Park Geun-hye administration. Meanwhile, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy urged voters to send a warning to the incumbent government for its poor handling of April's ferry tragedy and the investigation into the de facto owner of the ill-fated Seoul ferry, Yu Byung-won. And with 15 parliamentary seats are for grabs, both rival parties are still uncertain about the election results, only estimating a clear victory in 2 to 3 constituencies each. According to the party's internal surveys, rival party candidates are showing neck-and-neck races in mostly Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province, the area surrounding the capital, which is perceived as a barometer of public sentiment, and one district in Jeollanam-do province, a traditional liberal stomping ground. For Seoul's Dongjakbi district, former Saenuri Party lawmaker Na Kyung-won is running against Do Hae-chan of the minor opposition Justice Party. Ki Dong-min of the main opposition party quit last week to support No and to prevent splitting the liberal votes. Another important district is the Suwon-si constituency in Gyeonggi-do province, where former opposition leader Son Nak-gyu is not only hoping to win a seat in the city of Suwon, but also hoping to solidify his position within the opposition bloc, running against the ruling party's Kim Young-nam. But even political analysts are flopping on their predictions, so we'll have to wait and see what ballots decide.
All right, and Yusan, I think we can come up with 3 scenarios here. 1, the ruling party winning more seats and securing majority in parliament, and 2, the opposition party coming out as the victor, or lastly, a near tie-up between the 2 rival parties.
Right, and if the ruling Saenuri Party takes at least 9 seats, more than half of the total 15 today, it would regain majority in the National Assembly, and this would give momentum to the passage of bills aimed at revitalizing the economy and those related to next year's budget, as well as President Park's government restructuring and other reform-related bills put forth in the aftermath of April's ferry disaster.
And the victory this time around could give the new party leader Kim Moo-sung a chance to cement his authority, because he just stepped in right before the elections, and he can actually build a healthy and tight relationship with the presidential office because he's been vowing to do so, and not hesitating in delivering the party and the people's opinions to the president.
Right, and if the Saenuri Party only takes less than 6 seats, the political tug-of-war with the opposition party will intensify, further delaying passage of key bills and hampering the president's running of state affairs. And this would cause the president to lose more ground, as she has already seen her support ratings drop significantly after the government's mishandling of the ferry disaster and a series of failed personnel appointments. The outcome is also expected to create tension and conflict amongst different factions within the ruling party.
Well, then how do you think the results that we get today will affect the opposition?
If the opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy wins at least 9 seats in total, the biggest benefactors will be the party co-leaders Kim Han-gil and An Cheol-soo. Their leadership has repeatedly been questioned after the party failed to sweep the June local elections amid public anger over the government's response to the ferry accident, as well as during candidate nominations for today's elections.
And I would expect the opposition parties to gain power in voicing their concerns over the long lineup of pending bills and even in the running of state affairs.
Right, but if the opposition takes 6 seats or less, it would deal a heavy blow to the party and possibly lead to a breakup amongst the factions within the party. If support is lost, the leadership may be forced to resign and the party could hold an early convention. And a near tie supply of 7 to 8 seats for each side would have less of an effect, but cause some friction within the party.
All right, well, let's leave it there for now. And thank you so much for that report, Yusan and Myeonggil there. And we are continuing our by-election coverage at 10 p.m. Korea time on Primetime News. So see you guys again then.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. The Korean government says it's injecting about $25 billion into the Korean economy through fiscal measures and policy financing in the latter half of this year. This is part of a $40 billion stimulus package announced last week. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-wan also told policymakers today that the government will soon introduce measures to boost the service sector with the goal of creating jobs and perking up spending. The Korean economy saw a quarterly growth of 0.6% in the second quarter of this year, its weakest growth in over a year. Korea's industrial production rose over 2% in June from the previous month, but analysts say it's largely because output was just too low in May following the April ferry disaster. Na Hyun-kyung tells us more.
A 2.1% monthly rise for all industries and a 2.9% jump in the mining and manufacturing sector in production for the month of June. Statistics Korea says those were the biggest gains in more than 3 years and nearly 5 years, respectively. But analysts say it's merely because of a base effect.
The June numbers look good because we saw a big drop in May. The increase in domestic shipments of manufacturing goods is very weak. A bigger problem, though, is that overseas shipments are showing negative numbers, meaning exports have not been able to overcome the sluggish economy either. Investment in construction, as well as plants and equipment, are also slowing because of weak domestic demand and unfavorable conditions in the global economy.
The near 3% rise in the mining and manufacturing sector is attributed to increased output in semiconductors and metal processing, driven by demand from both home and abroad. But investment in plants and equipment went down by 1.4% from May, and spending also only edged up by 0.3%. Although it was the first time the overall monthly output has risen since April's ferry disaster, experts say it's too early to say the economy is emerging out of its sluggish trap. They add it doesn't mean the Korean economy is not improving, but the rate it's picking up is still pretty slow. Na Hyun-kyung, ARIRANG News.
Korea has enjoyed an exceptional reputation as a global powerhouse in shipbuilding, but its shipyards have recently run into difficulties. Their Chinese competitors are gaining ground fast as their skills are quickly catching up to their very attractive prices. Kim Ji-yeon tells us more.
Korean shipbuilders are struggling. The world market share fell 27% in the first 6 months of this year, a sharp drop from the 40% recorded in 2011, according to data from BS Financial Group. Chinese shipbuilders have filled the gap, taking advantage of their cheaper prices. Korea's Hyundai Heavy Industries has been fighting back, trying to boost orders of their so-called eco-ships, or ships that come equipped with energy-efficient technology. Korea's Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering has followed a similar course, producing mega-sized container ships that use 20% less fuel and emit 30% less carbon. But despite these efforts, China has led the shipbuilding sector since 2012, grabbing a 44% world market share in the first half of this year.
The Chinese government is rigorously lending support to the country's shipbuilders by providing subsidies. It also pays some 30 to 40% of the cost of new orders to local shipping companies that are replacing their aging vessels with new ones.
Underlining Korean shipyards' difficulties, Hyundai Heavy Industries, the world's largest shipbuilder in terms of sales, reported its worst quarterly operating loss of $1.08 billion for the 3 months to June. Hyundai attributed its loss to a high won and provisions it set aside for potential losses from building ships, plants, and offshore platforms, but said its performance would improve in coming quarters. The Korean shipbuilding industry is now eyeing new opportunities. Hyundai Heavy recently built a factory making engines that could be used for power plants and construction equipment. Daewoo Shipbuilding said it will put more emphasis on submarines and other defense-related vessels. Kim Jeon, ARIRANG News.
Although they are still number one, Samsung's strong grip on the smartphone market loosened considerably in the second quarter of this year. And the threat is coming from the rise of Chinese players luring away customers with their cheaper models. Hwang Jie has the details.
Samsung is looking black and blue after getting a blow from its Chinese competitors in the smartphone market. Market research firm IDC says the Korean tech giant's share of the global smartphone market plunged to just over 25% in the second quarter of this year. Although it managed to retain the top spot globally, its market share dropped more than 7 percentage points from the previous year. The number of Samsung smartphones shipped also fell almost 4% in the April to June period to 74.3 million units. During that same period, however, the global smartphone market expanded 23% to 295 million units. So which players expanded the handset market? The Chinese. Huawei, China's biggest maker of smartphones, nearly doubled shipments in the second quarter to 20.3 million units, holding down third place in terms of market share with 6.9%. Another Chinese tech firm, Lenovo, also gained market share with 5.4%, taking fourth place. Its shipments climbed almost 40% to 15.8 million units. IDC says the Chinese companies are attracting customers, especially from emerging markets with lower prices compared to top global rivals like Samsung and Apple. Apple also saw its market share dip by about 1 percentage point to 11.9%. Hwang Jie, ARIRANG News.
And this coming in the last hour or so, North Korea fired off 4 short-range projectiles this Wednesday, according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff. Only one of the 4 fired in 2 rounds is believed to have landed in the East Sea, and we'll try to get more information, confirmed information that is, on this development as we get it. And in a related event, the United Nations Security Council is reportedly meeting next Tuesday to discuss North Korea's recent missile launches. Citing government sources here, Yonhap News Agency reports that the council will be briefed by the UN Sanctions Committee, which was established back in 2006 after North Korea's first nuclear test. They update the council every 90 days, and since the last briefing in May, North Korea has fired off a series of short-range missiles as recently as this past Saturday and this Wednesday. As Seoul and Washington are seeing eye to eye on Pyongyang's growing hostility, Washington is calling for better ties between Seoul and Tokyo for a united front. Connie Kim reports.
Both South Korea and the U.S. are raising concerns over North Korea and the escalation of its military provocations under Kim Jong-un's leadership. South Korean Defense Minister Han Min-gu has pointed to Pyongyang's third nuclear test last year and recent launches of missile and rockets as evidence of that. He also said that the North has developed more sophisticated launch methods. And his Washington counterpart has echoed such concerns.
Their desire for nuclear missiles and nuclear capabilities, as we've said over and over again, are highly threatening to this global security environment.
And Locklear pointed to the strained ties between South Korea and Japan as a stumbling block in efforts to put North Korea in check and curb its nuclear weapons development.
They have a common concern, huge common concern with North Korea, and that we encourage them to, both Japan and South Korea, to work together to overcome their political difficulties so that we can work to provide a better security environment in this region.
Locklear emphasized that Seoul and Tokyo need to realize the importance of bilateral and trilateral military-to-military cooperation along with Washington. Historical and territorial disputes between Seoul and Tokyo have dipped bilateral relations to their lowest level in years. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
And quickly, as for the latest voter turnout, which could be a crucial element in deciding a winner or loser tonight in Korea's by-elections held in Korea today, the total voter turnout came in at 31% as of 8 p.m. Korea time, which is not much different from the latest that we got from an hour ago of 30.4%, and we will have more at 10 p.m. Korea time. The European Union and the United States have jointly placed their strongest pressure yet on Russia. Our Kim Hyun-bin is joining us from the News Center for more details. So, Hyun-bin, what do these new sanctions entail to put further pressure on Moscow?
Well, the 28-member European bloc has agreed to implement far-reaching economic sanctions targeting Russia's energy, banking, and defense sectors, even as Moscow continues to deny the charges. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
The European Union and the United States on Tuesday announced further sanctions against Russia in the strongest international action yet over Moscow's support for rebels in eastern Ukraine. In Brussels, the 28-member European bloc agreed to restrictions on the trade of equipment for the oil and defense sectors. Russia's state-run banks will also be barred from raising funds in European capital markets. The move marks the strongest confrontation between Moscow and the West since the end of the Cold War. This latest action was triggered by the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 by what was likely a Russian-supplied missile. Moscow continues to deny the charges. The U.S. also imposed sanctions on Moscow by banning Americans or people in the U.S. from banking with 3 Russian banks. President Obama said if Russia remains on its current path, the costs on Russia will continue to grow, and that the coordinated actions of the U.S. and EU will make the weak Russian economy even weaker. The sanctions could cost Russia some $30 billion this year, according to online media EU Observer. But if Moscow slaps back with similar action, the EU could suffer damage estimated at $55 billion. To mitigate the impact on the European economy, the new sanctions will not affect previous contracts, and Russia's natural gas, which powers European industry and lights its cities, has been spared. Russia is the world's biggest exporter of natural gas and the second biggest exporter of oil. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Israel's amped-up offensive on the Gaza Strip continued into early Wednesday morning local time there. At least 45 people were reported killed and many others hurt, including 20 in a UN school. Hyun-bin, what's the latest?
Well, a health ministry spokesman said among the dead were 5 members of the same family, a medic and an infant, leaving the total death toll over 1,200. This follows Tuesday's overnight strikes that targeted key Hamas infrastructure, including the satellite TV station Al-Aqsa, a central mosque in Gaza City, and the home of a top political leader, Ismail Haniyeh. Israel has rejected reports that it also shot through the area's only power plant. Meanwhile, foreign pressure has been mounting on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to rein in his forces. Local Israeli reports say a Palestinian delegation, which includes Hamas leaders, was expected to arrive in Cairo for peace talks.
All right, and one of China's most influential politicians of the last decade is embroiled in a corruption scandal.
As China's Communist Party on Tuesday said that it launched a corruption investigation into former domestic security chief Zhao Yongkang. Zhao is the highest profile figure caught up in President Xi Jinping's crackdown on corruption, and is the most senior official to be ensnared in a graft scandal since 1949. News of an inquiry into Zhao's activities were welcomed in Beijing.
Zhao Yongkang was a very high-ranking official. It's good that even high-ranking officials are now being punished for corruption because it sends a warning to lower-ranking officials.
He was a member of the Politburo Standing Committee and held the post of security czar until he retired in 2012. Zhao is accused of corruption involving family members, as well as accepting bribes to promote officials.
Now, if you've ever had shin splints, you know every step that you take can be very painful, but we have a very new type of footwear, innovative footwear is hitting the market to help ease this pain.
Yes, that's right. A biomechanist has created a shoe that will literally put a spring back into your step. Our Shin Se-min reports.
It could be just what the doctor ordered for people suffering from shin splints, a painful condition common among athletes and people who engage in running or intense walking. A British biomechanist has developed new shoes with springs in front of the heel, and although other manufacturers have tried similar methods, Jim Usherwood is confident his product is different.
If you have a spring here, then you have to change the way you stand. The second different thing about these is that they effectively reach an end stop. When you're standing in a mid-stance, they're compressed enough that they're not moving anymore. So then you can vault over the middle stance, very much like normal walking, and you don't have to bounce up and down.
Studies show that every step a human makes, energy is wasted. These spring shoes aim to reduce that waste. When a person's foot is flat on the ground, their shin muscles flex, which puts a strain on them. But with the spring shoes, their shin muscles are forced to do less work. Usherwood says that the prototype might be able to help people who walk long distances like soldiers. And with the help of some commercial backing, Usherwood hopes to put a spring shoe on the market after a bit of design modification. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
All right, good stuff there. Hyunbin, thank you very much for those stories. And that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.